Hello, everyone. My name is Audra Williams, or you can call me Jay or Audra, or J Audra, or any of those feels good to me. I use he and they pronouns. I am currently at Arizona State University. I am a second year PhD student in educational policy and evaluation. My mentor and advisor here at ASU is Dr. Antonio Duran. A little bit about me before we get jump into the development of the survey instrument that I developed as part of a course in my program here at ASU. I identify as queer. I'm an openly queer scholar pursuing my PhD, primarily looking at queer communities and trans communities within higher education contexts. I often do a lot of qualitative work, but recently I've been kind of dipping my toe into the quantitative realm. And so this is kind of one of my first experiences engaging with survey development as part of this course. Really found it really interesting and challenging, as I know many of us probably have experienced those, and how quantitative measures often can flatten the experiences of queer people and trans people. But this has really been a great learning experience for me. So I'll just jump right back in. So for today, I developed a queer sense of belonging in higher education context survey as part of a course. As I said earlier, it's definitely not perfect. It's a work in progress. But I'm really excited to share kind of the process with you all today. So for starters, the agenda for today, I'll start with defining the target population and intended use. I'll go through the development process that I went through as part of the course. I'll share the final instrument. And then I'll also kind of talk about scoring and reporting, reliability and validity, kind of discuss a discussion and limitations, and then kind of a call to kind of further discussion with this community because I'm still pretty new with R Studio. It's my first time using it as part of this course and developing this survey, kind of what ways that we can use R to kind of validate this type of work to honor the diverse queer community that is within higher education and broadly. So for sense of belonging or belongingness, I looked at Lee and Robbins, 1995. It's a fundamental need to interrelate, feel connected, and experience acceptance through relationships. It's a multi-dimensional construct, right? It has three core elements, really kind of that companionship, which is kind of that emotional or intimate relationships that lessens loneliness and improves the mood. Affiliation, so kind of socializing with your peers, which helps to increase your self-esteem and build networks of queer community or of just networks. Connectedness, the identification with larger community that offers well-being and lessens anxiety, and kind of taking that sense of belonging definition and moving it towards a queer sense of belonging. That's really how queer or LGBTQ plus individuals experience companionship, affiliation, and connectedness, right? So those core three elements of sense of belonging are kind of the framework here. And so from that, I kind of built on these already existing kind of sense of belonging scales to kind of bring it into that queer realm. So queer sense of belonging in higher education context in particular, which is a very unique, nuanced thing because there's queer students, there's queer staff, there's queer faculty, right? Everyone kind of has a different experience between all three of those groups, but all make up the queer community within higher education. And so I was looking specifically on campuses for the queer students, staff, and faculty. So the four dimensions I kind of adapted from these existing scales was sociopolitical awareness and collective identity. Those were connected. Community engagement and participation, sense of community and connection, and interpersonal support networks. Those are kind of the four dimensions that I included in my developing of my scale. So I'll add more about that here later on as well. Okay, so queer sense of belonging. Here's kind of a visual for all of us to see. So queer sense of belonging in higher education context. There's that sociopolitical awareness and collective identity, or SACI, which will be referenced in the future. There was three items in that. And then community engagement and participation. There were CEP. There was four items. And then sense of community and connection, SCC. There was six items and also included two reverse coded items. And then internal support networks, or ISN, there was a total of five items there. So a total of approximately 18 items were a part of this survey. As a first time survey kind of engagement with survey development. I would kind of change some of these in the future, but this is kind of what I did for the class, and so that's what I'm presenting on today. So really, why does this matter? I know many of us know why this matters, and I know that maybe not all of us are in the U.S. context, but also I think there is a context outside of the U.S. that also, especially in the U.K., around things and data for queer data and trans data, exclusionary practices and things. Also, has been some wins. So, but here in the U.S. context, the ACLU or the American Civil Liberty Union has been tracking a lot of anti-LGBTQ bills in the United States, and so this obviously will impact people broadly who are queer and trans within the U.S., their sense of belonging just because of that, as well as within higher education context, right? Because a lot of what we've seen here in the U.S., in the current administration, there has been a lot of folks, a lot of targeting of education. And specifically anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion, so including queer and trans folks within these communities. So target population and intended use of this instrument. So target population was anyone who is self-identifying as queer and or LGBTQ plus. I personally prefer the word queer as it feels like it's more of an encompassing and umbrella term. But I know that many folks also resonate with initialisms like LGBTQ plus. But so really looking at, so that's just a note on language there, but any self-identifying queer and or LGBTQ plus individual in the US higher education system. So this could be students, either undergraduate students or graduate students, staff, like practitioners and queer centers, or just staff in general working administratively, as well as faculty members. So that's kind of the target population for this instrument, which is kind of complicated because those are all varied experiences within higher education. And so that is, and later on, I'll talk about how that became kind of a challenge and a limitation in ways. But the intended use statement for this instrument is the survey instrument is designed to measure queer sense of belonging experienced by queer students, staff, and faculty in higher education contexts. The results are intended to be used by higher education leaders and administration to foster a more inclusive college or university experience for queer students, staff, and faculty. So really kind of using this as a guide to see what their sense of belonging is within these colleges and universities, and how can these colleges and universities really foster a more inclusive environment for them. So kind of a brief literature overview here or review. So qualitative research studies have explored campus climate and sense of belonging of queer students, staff, and faculty. Um, and there's not been as much done quantitatively in these ways. There has been some studies as well, but the primary source of the adaptation for this instrument was the LGBTQ belongingness attainment scale. That was in 2020. There was 18 items, so I kind of mirrored this one off of having 18 items as well. The Chromevax Alpha was 0.95, which is excellent reliability. There was three subscales, as I mentioned previously: companionship, affiliation, connectedness. All came back with alphas of 0.94, 0.92, and 0.89. And there was a strong factorial validity with the CFI being 0.91, IFI 0.91, and it was validated with an N of 188 LGBTQ individuals, specifically located in Washington, D.C. And so I also drew from the connectedness to LGBT community, which had a Cronbach alpha of 0.81, and incorporated also social connectedness and social assurance scales as well. So the theoretical foundation to this is a lot of cahoots, self-psychology, and alter ego self-objects, as well as I identified a gap in many of these measures. Existing measures focus broadly on community belonging, not specific to higher education context. Recognizing this limitation, prior measures also additionally measured centered white, cisgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals, which limits the representation of queer, trans, non-binary, and BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color participants in these survey instruments that have been developed previously. So just noting on some limitations there and the gaps I saw. So ranking the items, I adapted all 18 items from the LGBTQ belonging attainment scale. I contextualized them into having like phrasing like on campus, experiences as opposed to broadly in the greater community, modified language to be role specific. So students versus like staff and faculty, I kind of ended up grouping students and then staff and faculty as experiences. I'll get more into that later. and then reorganized into four subscales instead of the original three that were on the original scale I built adapted this from: sociopolitical awareness and collective identity, community engagement and participation, sense of community and connection, interpersonal support networks. So those are the four dimensions or subscales. And I changed it from a 6 point Likert scale to a 5 point Likert scale with a neutral midpoint. And I modified close friend or companion that was often in the original scale to differentiate close friend to students um, versus colleague for staff and faculty, kind of that nuanced language there. And so after I kind of created the scale, right, I did some cognitive interviews with my network of queer academic network here using a Think Aloud protocol. And so the interview protocol included like I read each item aloud and had the answer as they normally would. And then I probed like, what were you thinking during this? What is the question? What do you think the question is asking? Was anything unclear in this question? Overall feedback on the survey, and got some overall feedback on their survey experience during that time. Um, Key findings from cognitive interviewers, there was a dual role complexity. So I had some folks that were both staff, working as staff full time, and also in graduate school. I had some online students that were there, which adds a barrier to maybe creating a sense of belonging or community. Some item redundancy, inconsistency with language, like for example, on campus. Also, sociopolitical climate item clarification kind of needed there as well. Overall, the items were generally clear, easy to understand, thoughtful, and appropriate for a Likert scale instrument. And so the revisions I did based on the cognitive interview feedback, I updated sociopolitical climate to from I feel to I'm personally affected for clarity, maintained on-campus language consistently despite limitations to preserve the hydrocation context focus. Because I feel like if folks started thinking broader outside of the context, it would kind of miss what the scale is trying to measure. Because I know we all as queer people have community and sense of belonging outside that helps us engage in our spaces of like higher education, but wanted to kind of nuance down. And as I said earlier, differentiate close French for students and colleague language for staff and faculty. I kept items 2 and 6 despite similarity. They measured different aspects of support versus participation, I felt. Structural changes, I split original connectedness dimension into two subscales, the sociopolitical and identity, and then engagement and participation. Create a separate ISN subscale for interpersonal support, originally part of the companionship from the original scale, and consolidate community feelings into the SSC subscale as well. And I reduced from 6 point to 5 point Likert, as I mentioned, with the neutral midpoint. Accessibility enhancement, I included multiple pages with a progress bar at the top with question pro. I also included some demographic questions, which were all optional and all open text entry. So there wasn't like a exhaustive list or non-exhaustive list. That's kind of where I landed with that. So the final survey instrument is here. Please select your role. I'll kind of click through here. As you see, you can select your role there. You could select undergraduate student, graduate student, staff, faculty, and then below statements about your experiences with the queer community on campus. Please indicate your level of agreement with each statement using the following: strongly disagree, which is 1, to strongly agree, which is 5. So the items for this first one, the sociopolitical awareness one, I am personally affected by the current sociopolitical climate facing the queer community on my campus. I am proud to be a part of the queer community on my campus. I feel a common bond with queer community on my campus. So really kind of emphasizing that queer community aspect and the sociopolitical climate. And then lower statements and experiences with the queer community on your campus. Please indicate level of engagement with each statement. The following scale: strongly disagree to strongly agree again. It is important for me to support queer initiatives and advocacy efforts on my campus. It is important for me to participate in my campus's peer community events, programming, and advocacy efforts. Participating in queer community organization and events and activities is meaningful to me. I enjoy socializing with queer. And here's where it kind of branches off: students, staff, faculty on my campus. This would be bracketed to auto-populate in Question Pro, which also proved to be a really challenging when I was looking at the data in R. And so then here's some more. I feel a sense of connectedness to the queer community on my campus. I feel a sense of community when I'm with other queer students, staff, faculty on my campus. Still the bracket there. I feel more at ease when I'm around queer students, staff, faculty on my campus. I feel a sense of acceptance when I'm with other queer students, staff, faculty on my campus. I feel isolated from the queer community on my campus, which is the reverse coded items. I avoid queer identified spaces on my campus, which is also reverse coded. It's important for me to develop social and professional network within the queer community on my campus. I have at least one queer or allied close friend, colleague on my campus who I interact with regularly. I have at least one queer or allied close friend or colleague who understands me on campus. I feel emotionally supported by queer or allied close friend, colleague on my campus. I have at least one queer or allied colleague or close friend on my campus who I can discuss my problems with. So that's the instrument. There's a lot of plugging in of close friend, colleague, or faculty, staff, and students. And so the demographical information I asked, which was all optional, was age, gender, sexuality, or sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disability status or ability status, additional salient identities, domestic or international student, full-time or part-time, years at current institution, institution type, and geographical location. So scoring and reporting, it was the 5-point Likert scale, 1 being strongly disagree, all the way to 5 being strongly agree, unless reverse coded in items 12 and 13. I calculated the mean scores, not sums for each subscale separately. And I did not calculate the overall total score of subscale, measure distinct dimensions of belongingness. Report separate subscale means with descriptive interpretation categories for students, staff, and faculty. Some interpretation guidelines. 1 to 2.4 would be low belonging, 2.5 to 3.4 would be moderate belonging, 3.5 to 5 would be high belonging. So the higher subscale score indicates stronger sense of belonging in that specific dimension. Examples, a high SASI or low CAP equals awareness and pride about barriers to participation. High ISN and low SSC, strong individual connections but weak broader community ties. Misinterpretations do not interpret low scores as individual deficits, personal failings, or lack of effort. They reflect institutional and systemic failures to create inclusive environments, and do not calculate or interpret an overall total belonging score. The 4 dimensions are conceptually distinct, and collapsing them would obscure the important nuances. Do not use scores in isolation from qualitative context about institutional climate, resources, recent events, and participant narratives. So with pilot testing, I reached out to colleagues, mentors, and friends via text, email, or social media to complete the survey. I had a total of 46 participants. There was 30 students, 30 or 16 staff, 15 faculty. So that was a big array. That was proved to be really challenging the way that I set it up. Yeah, so due to the nature of how I set it up, there was some missing data throughout because of the branching off. So that made it a little difficult in R for me to kind of navigate. So item analysis, here are like the descriptive statistics, the mean, medians, and modes for each of the subscales, the sociopolitical awareness and collective identity, sense of community and connection, community engagement and participation, interpersonal support networks. And then kind of getting into the reliability of using R, strong subscales were CEP for students, CEP for staff, ISN for students, SSCC for students and staff and faculty, ISN for staff and faculty. But subscales for full development would be the sociopolitical and awareness and collective identity. Those were pretty low for students, staff, and faculty, as well as faculty for CEP. Yeah, so there's some issues there. I need to look back into these and fix it, but this is what I did for reliability for this purpose. And for Liberty, it was too low of an N, so only having 46 participants in the way that it was differentiated between students, staff, and faculty made it difficult to do any validity. So there's some potential measurement bias here, socially desirable responding, identity disclosures concerns, role complexity, online versus in-person student differences, cultural and linguistic bias, socioeconomic bias, cognitive load, 18 plus items plus demographic questions, some sample bias, historical underrepresentation as well. Implementations, the construct of evolution, on-campus restriction, cross-sectional diagrams, self-report bias, temporal specificity, reverse-coded items, lack of qualitative data, institutional variation, sub-skill interpretation, no established norms without large-scale validation, difficult to contextualize these scores, intersectional complexity as well. So next steps, disaggregate by optional demographic responses for greater nuance of intersectionality is what I need to do. And then for additional like survey development, conduct additional cognitive interviews with diverse participants, revise items based on comprehensive cognitive interview feedback. pilot test with a larger sample, kind of goal of like 200, 300 to be able to do more quantitative analysis in R. Refine subscale structure if needed, validation, large-scale data collection across diverse institutions, confirmatory factor analysis, a four-factor structure, measurement invariance testing across key groups, establish convergent, divergent validity with related measures, test, retest reliability assessment. These are kind of just some ideas. And then kind of the last question here is like, what creative ways do you all and this community of Rainbow R um, recommend using R to validate to capture the belonging experiences across the diverse queer community within higher education contexts? That's kind of where I'm at. I'm very new to R Studio and new to engaging with survey development and quantitative measures. So I'm really interested in having a discussion around what creative ways can we use this information and capture the belonging experiences across the diverse queer community within higher education contexts. Thank you.